A millionaire finds a baby in a basket, and the truth binds him to his maid forever. Have you ever imagined your peaceful morning shattering in an instant because of a small basket left on your doorstep? Not a gift, not a prank, but a fragile little life, an abandoned child. And even more heartbreaking, that child is connected to someone closer to you than you could ever imagine. Our story begins with Michael Carter, a successful 36-year-old attorney living in a quiet, affluent neighborhood in Boston. One chilly autumn morning, as Michael stepped out of his house ready to begin another ordinary day, he unknowingly opened the door to an entirely new chapter. A small basket, seemingly harmless, was waiting for him. A basket that would forever change his life and lead him toward two people whom destiny had chosen for him to meet. An exclusive Noah's Stories production. If you see it elsewhere, please come back to our official channel to enjoy it in full. To fully grasp the weight of that fateful event, we need to look at the life Michael Carter had built for himself beforehand. To most people, he was the very definition of success. A sharp, renowned attorney in Boston, a man whose voice carried weight in high-profile cases, and the proud owner of his own law firm. He wore tailored suits that fit like armor and walked into courtrooms with a confidence that inspired both admiration and caution. At 36, Michael had achieved what many dream of their entire lives: a sprawling home in the prestigious neighborhood of Beacon Hill, a sleek BMW gleaming in his garage, and a bank account large enough to keep him free from financial worries for years to come. He knew exactly what he wanted in his career, and he had worked tirelessly to attain it, but looking deeper into Michael's life revealed an emptiness that couldn't be hidden. Behind the armor of success and self-assurance was a man detached from the world of feelings. He had never been married, never been in love long enough to call it meaningful, and certainly never entertained the thought of having children. Each morning was a perfect replica of the last, waking at 5:30 a.m., brewing himself a strong cup of black coffee, reading legal and financial news in his spotless kitchen, then driving to his office while most of the city was still asleep. For Michael, order and discipline were paramount. There was no room for spontaneity, and certainly no room for the chaos of emotions or unplanned surprises. His career, the numbers on contracts, the victories in court, these were the only measures of his worth. Yet what he didn't know was that, within hours, all those numbers would mean nothing in front of a single fragile cry. He functioned like a well-oiled machine, never allowing any factor to disrupt his rhythm. His circle of friends was small, his family lived far away, and his vast home was as cold and impersonal as a luxurious office space. Michael often told himself he didn't need anyone to feel complete. Yet on long nights when he returned late, stepping into a mansion so silent he could hear his own footsteps, there were fleeting moments of emptiness, a void he quickly brushed aside by burying himself in work the next morning. He believed he had full control of his life, but fate was about to prove otherwise. On a chilly autumn morning, right at his doorstep, the arrival of a fragile little life would shatter everything he had ever considered perfect. That morning began like any other. Michael Carter, bound to the rigid routine he had followed for years, was about to leave the house precisely at 6 o'clock. Late October in Boston was biting cold, the air heavy with frost, and the streets outside still cloaked in silence. He locked the door, stepped down the marble steps, his mind already occupied with court cases and contracts awaiting his signature. But right there, something unusual made his footsteps falter. On the doorstep sat a small wicker basket, carefully placed as if someone had chosen the spot to protect it from the wind. At first, Michael frowned. Perhaps it was some odd prank, or maybe a surprise gift from a grateful client. He bent down, hands hesitant, and gently lifted the blue blanket covering the basket. In that instant, his heart seemed to stop. Inside wasn't a fine bottle of wine or an extravagant gift. It was a baby. A tiny boy, no more than 3 months old, sleeping peacefully as if the world around him didn't exist. His little fists were clenched, his breathing soft and uneven, his skin a healthy pink. It was a fragile image Michael had never faced before. For several seconds he stood frozen, searching for a logical explanation. Yet the neighborhood was utterly silent. No figure lingered nearby. Only the sound of morning birds filled the air. Then his eyes caught a folded note pinned inside the basket. The handwriting was shaky, hurried. "Please take care of him. I have no other choice. God bless you." A strange surge welled up in Michael's chest. It wasn't exactly pity, but it certainly wasn't indifference either. The baby looked healthy, clothed in clean, new garments, with even a small teddy bear tucked beside him. Clearly, someone had poured all the love they had left into this basket before walking away. "What the hell am I supposed to do now?" Michael muttered, running a hand through his neatly combed hair. He had never held a newborn, never changed a diaper, never mixed formula. He had never imagined himself in a moment like this. Part of his rational mind urged him to call the police or social services. But another part, a part he thought had been dormant for years, urged him not to walk away from this child. Michael carefully bent down and lifted the basket. To his surprise, it was so light it unsettled him. The baby remained asleep, blissfully unaware of the storm of doubt raging in the successful lawyer's mind. Michael placed the wicker basket on the glass coffee table in the living room, his eyes fixed on the peacefully sleeping baby. The vast mansion, usually quiet, now felt heavy with silence. Every tick of the wall clock echoed sharply in his ears. He stood there, phone in hand, torn between calling the police or child services. But the more he stared at the shaky handwriting on the note, "Please take care of him," the harder it was to press that call button. He paced the room in slow, restless circles, helplessness building inside him. All those years of controlling every detail of his life with logic suddenly seemed meaningless in the face of this fragile little life. A thought chilled him. Perhaps someone had chosen his house, him, as the final place of trust. As Michael wrestled with his thoughts, the sound of a key turning in the front door jolted him. His head snapped up, his heart pounding. And when the door swung open, stepping inside, was Sarah Lopez, the 25-year-old young woman who had worked in his home for over 2 years. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she greeted in her usual even tone. But her gaze quickly fell upon the basket on the table. Her entire body stiffened, her brown eyes widened, lips trembling as though words had abandoned her. A baby?" she whispered, almost breathless. Michael nodded, tension in his voice. "I found him on the doorstep this morning." Sarah moved closer, each step slow, as if drawn by an invisible force. When her eyes rested on the tiny face inside, tears welled instantly. She turned away, but not before one slipped down her cheek. "He's beautiful," she murmured, her voice faltering, carrying an emotion far deeper than Michael could understand. He stared at her, surprised. In 2 years of employment, Sarah had always been quiet and diligent, never revealing much. Yet now her reaction felt almost personal. "I don't know what to do," Michael admitted, exposing a rare vulnerability. "I've never cared for a child before." Sarah lifted her gaze, her eyes shimmering, a mix of sorrow and resolve. "But I have," she said softly. "I raised my younger siblings." Without waiting for permission, Sarah leapt into action. She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a cup of warm water. With practiced ease, she checked the baby's comfort, whether he was thirsty, cold, or needed a change. Michael could only watch. Sarah moved with swift tenderness, as though this was second nature to her. When the infant suddenly cried, she leaned down and scooped him up, holding him so naturally that Michael was stunned. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's okay," she whispered, rocking gently, patting his back. The cries faded, replaced by steady breathing against her shoulder. Michael had never seen Sarah like this. The young woman, who usually worked quietly in the background, now radiated warmth and gentle light. It was as if a hidden part of her had awakened. "He needs formula, fresh diapers, and a proper crib," Sarah said firmly, her eyes never leaving the child. "We have to get those right away." Michael's heart skipped at her use of the word "we." Without thinking, he blurted, "Where do we get them?" Sarah paused, her expression softening. "There's a baby store about 10 minutes away, but Mr. Carter—" Her voice lowered. "Are you certain you want to be involved in this?" Michael stood in silence for a long beat. He was a lawyer, a man of reason and order. But watching Sarah cradle the child, he knew deep down that from this moment there was no turning back. The baby store sat about 10 minutes away from Michael's affluent neighborhood. The trip, seemingly ordinary, became the quiet beginning of a profound shift in his life. Sarah carried the infant in her arms the entire way. Each time Ethan, the name she softly whispered to the baby, stirred or whimpered, she instinctively adjusted her hold, soothing him with natural ease. Michael drove in silence, his hands on the wheel, but his eyes often flicked to the rearview mirror, watching the scene with an unfamiliar sensation. Inside the store, Sarah moved confidently through the aisles. She knew exactly which formula was best, what size diapers to choose, which clothes would be most comfortable. Michael trailed behind with the cart, silently paying for everything. When he glanced at the bill, longer than most of his expensive dinners, he didn't feel irritation. Instead, a strange feeling rose within him. For the first time, his money was being used not for self-indulgence, but to nurture something greater. Back at the house, they immediately set to work. Sarah transformed an unused guest room into a small nursery, assembling the crib, folding clothes, arranging toys. Michael stood by, clumsy in his attempts to help, yet quietly amazed at her efficiency and care. That evening, for the first time, Michael tried holding Ethan. The baby cried loudly, his tiny body writhing, leaving Michael stiff with panic. Sarah only smiled gently, adjusting his hands, guiding him to sway. Gradually, Ethan calmed, nestling his cheek against Michael's chest. Michael exhaled deeply, struck by the realization that he was touching a part of life he had never known. In the days that followed, the mansion began to change. The once sterile silence gave way to cries, giggles, and the soft lullabies Sarah hummed through the halls. Michael, who used to stay late at work to avoid loneliness, now rushed home early. He longed to hear Sarah's recounting of the day's little things, how long Ethan had slept, how many times he had smiled, or how he reacted to music. Michael even hired a professional nanny to assist during the day. Yet strangely, Ethan only seemed truly at peace in Sarah's arms. The young woman with the gentle brown eyes held something no one else could offer. And Michael began to realize he too was being drawn into that circle, not merely out of duty, but by a warmth growing steadily within him, something he wasn't ready to name, not yet. Michael's house had always been silent, every room arranged to prevent disorder, to keep surprises away. But since Ethan's arrival, that silence had vanished. Cries, tiny giggles, and the soft hum of Sarah's voice had become the mansion's new rhythm. One evening, as Michael sat in his study, his eyes on contracts he could barely focus on, he heard singing drift from the next room. At first, he assumed it was just a familiar lullaby. But when he listened more closely, something in his chest tightened. Sarah's voice was warm, yet trembling. "Sleep well, my little boy. Mommy will always be here, never leaving you again." Michael froze. The word "mommy" cut through the silence like a blade. He rose, walking quietly into the hallway. Through the half-closed door, golden light spilled out, and he saw Sarah on the rocking chair, Ethan in her arms. Her head bent low, her song overflowing with love and regret. "Forgive me for those first days when you had to go without. But now I'm here. I won't leave you again." Michael leaned against the wall, his heartbeat racing. The fragments he had noticed, her tearful glances, the strange familiarity in her care, the devotion in every movement, clicked together into one undeniable truth. Sarah was the child's mother. But if that was true, why had she left Ethan on his doorstep? And why him? In the days that followed, Michael said nothing, but he began to watch more carefully. He saw Sarah sometimes sit for hours by the crib, her fingers brushing Ethan's tiny hand as though she feared losing him. He saw her smile when Ethan giggled, only to turn away quickly and wipe her eyes. Another night, coming into the kitchen past midnight, Michael found her sitting at the table, eyes swollen, clutching a small piece of fabric. He recognized it as an old baby blanket, worn but carefully preserved. When she noticed him, she tucked it away with a forced smile, murmuring it was a childhood keepsake. But her eyes betrayed her words. Michael didn't know how to face it. He felt deceived, yet also drawn in. Each time he saw Sarah and Ethan together, he couldn't deny the invisible, powerful bond between them. The boy rested peacefully in her arms in a way no one else, not even Michael himself or the nanny, could replicate. One morning, Michael entered the room just as Sarah bent to kiss Ethan's forehead and whispered, "My son." The words lingered in the air, leaving him breathless. She had no idea he was standing there. That night, Michael lay awake, his thoughts circling endlessly. He remembered the note left in the wicker basket. "Please take care of him. I have no other choice. May God bless you." Now those words carried an entirely different weight. They weren't from a stranger. They were Sarah's desperate cry for help. He began to understand. Behind her secret was a story heavy with pain. But he also knew that such truth couldn't remain hidden forever. Sooner or later, Sarah would have to face him, just as he would have to face what he was beginning to feel. That night, the house was wrapped in an unusual stillness. Michael sat in his study, his mind unable to cling to the files before him. The wind outside whispered against the windows, the ticking clock hammering the emptiness inside him. Then came the faint sound of a whisper. Sarah's voice, soft and near, drifted from Ethan's room. Michael rose, his heartbeat quickening as he approached the half-closed door. "I'm sorry I couldn't be with you from the start." Sarah's voice trembled, dissolving into the night. Michael froze. The words struck like lightning. He had suspected Sarah shared a hidden bond with Ethan, but he had never imagined this truth. In the days that followed, the air in the house grew heavier for Michael. He said nothing about what he had seen and heard, but the silence itself bound them like an invisible cord. Sarah continued to care for Ethan with her familiar tenderness, yet every now and then Michael caught a flicker of unease in her eyes, as though she feared the day her secret would surface. On a Friday evening, after Ethan had fallen asleep in his new crib, Sarah entered the kitchen to prepare a night bottle. Michael was already there, seated under the warm glow of the overhead light, his expression solemn. "Sarah," he said, his voice low. She froze, the bottle still in her hands, cap undone. "Yes, Mr. Carter?" "We need to talk." The simple words drained the color from her face. She swallowed hard, set the bottle on the table, and slowly pulled out a chair across from him. Her eyes stayed fixed on her lap, unable to meet his. "Ethan," Michael began carefully, "does he have any connection to you?" Silence. Tears welled, though she fought to contain them. Finally, she drew a deep breath. "You already know, don't you?" Michael said nothing at first. He only looked at her, his gaze heavy with both pain and gentleness. Sarah bowed her head, her hands clenched tightly. Ethan is my sister Isabella's child." Michael froze, his breath caught in his chest. He had braced himself for a confession that Sarah was Ethan's mother, but her words struck him with an even heavier weight. My sister was so young when she got pregnant, Sarah continued, her voice breaking. The father abandoned her the moment he found out. I tried to help, but we had nothing but our own hands. And then, after giving birth to Ethan, her body couldn't take it. Isabella passed away, whispering her baby's name with her last breath. Tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks. Michael sat in silence, grief rising within him for both sisters. That day, I held Ethan in my arms, and my world collapsed. I was only 25, unmarried, with no family to lean on. I worked here, earned so little, and I knew I wasn't capable of raising a newborn. My apartment was damp, unsafe, and I was drowning in despair. She lifted her gaze, trembling. I couldn't send him to an orphanage. I've seen those places, children growing up without love. I thought of you. For 2 years I've worked in this house, and I saw you, strict, yes, but fair and kind at heart. I believed you could give Ethan the chance I never could. Michael remembered the note in the basket. Please take care of him. I have no other choice. Now every word rang with new meaning. Sarah's voice cracked as she went on. I left Ethan at your door out of desperation, but the moment I walked away, I knew it was the greatest mistake of my life. I returned to my empty apartment, feeling like my soul had shattered. When you let me help care for him, it was a miracle. It was my only way to keep my promise to Isabella, that Ethan would be loved. Michael was silent for a long moment. His eyes reflected both sorrow and admiration. He reached across the table, resting his hand on hers. Sarah, you don't have to carry this pain alone anymore. Sarah looked back at him, her eyes red and swollen, yet a fragile glimmer of hope flickered within them. Michael sat in silence for a long moment after Sarah's confession. In the warm glow of the kitchen light, his face was tense, yet his eyes carried something thoughtful, something almost gentle. Sarah, he finally spoke, his voice rough. You should have told me from the beginning. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes again. I know. Every day I wanted to, but every time I saw Ethan smiling here, I froze. I was terrified. Terrified you'd take him away from me. Terrified I'd lose my only chance to keep the promise I made to Isabella. Michael lowered his head, reflecting. He understood her fear, yet he was deeply moved by the love she had shown. Lifting his gaze, his voice grew firm. You were wrong to hide the truth, but I can't fault you for loving that boy so fiercely, and I can't deny that. Ethan has changed my life completely. Sarah's eyes widened at his unexpected admission. Michael leaned back, sighing. Before Ethan came, all I knew was work, money, numbers. I had no room for feelings, no place for family. And then one October night, someone left a baby at my door. From that moment on, I've never been the same. His voice was slow, earnest, and it made Sarah's heart tremble. I need you to understand this, Sarah, he said, his hand brushing against hers. I have no intention of taking Ethan away from you. On the contrary, I believe he needs you more than anyone else. He looks at you as if you're his entire world. And I need both of you in this house. Sarah bit her lip as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but this time they weren't only from sorrow. They carried a weight of relief. Mr. Carter, she whispered, her voice breaking. Michael held her gaze, his eyes full of emotions he had hidden for too long. I also need you to know, I've begun to feel something for you, not just because of Ethan, but because of who you are. Your strength, your kindness, your love for your nephew, they've made me see life differently. The kitchen fell into a deep silence. Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. Her heart raced wildly, torn between fear and longing. I don't deserve you, she blurted, looking down. I'm just a housemaid. I have nothing to offer you except my love for Ethan. Michael shook his head, his tone warm but resolute. You've given me more than anyone ever has. You've given me meaning. You've given me love. And I won't let social barriers or foolish judgments stand in the way of that." Tears poured freely as Sarah broke down in his arms. He held her tightly, feeling her trembling, her pain, and the fragile hope she carried. "We'll raise Ethan together," he whispered. "Not out of obligation, but as a real family." Sarah lifted her head, her eyes still glistening, but filled now with a newfound light. "Are you sure?" Michael smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "I've never been more certain." That night marked a quiet but profound shift. No longer boss and housemaid, no longer two lost souls bound only by circumstance, but three hearts beginning to beat as one family. Since the night Sarah revealed the truth, something had permanently shifted inside the Grant mansion. The invisible wall between employer and maid dissolved, slowly replaced by a warmth that felt as though the three of them had always belonged together. Michael began to adjust his demanding schedule. Instead of rushing out at dawn and returning late at night, he made sure to be present for breakfast. The mornings, once silent and sterile, now filled with soft laughter, Ethan's babbling, and sometimes Sarah's gentle humming as she prepared a bottle. Michael learned how to change diapers, awkwardly at first, making both himself and Sarah laugh. He learned how to hold Ethan so the boy wouldn't cry, how to tell the difference between a hunger cry and a tired one. Strangely enough, a man once consumed only by contracts and numbers found joy in these smallest of details. In the afternoons, instead of endless meetings, Michael spent time walking with Sarah and Ethan to the nearby park. Sarah often sat on a wooden bench cradling Ethan, while Michael stood protectively beside her, his watchful gaze more like that of a father than a guardian. Passers-by might have thought they were a small family, and strangely, Michael realized he no longer feared that thought. One evening, as Sarah rocked Ethan to sleep with a soft lullaby, Michael stood quietly in the doorway. He had never imagined a simple melody could shake his heart so deeply. When Sarah's eyes lifted to meet his, the two shared a silence heavy with unspoken meaning. "You know," Sarah whispered, "sometimes I feel like Isabella is watching over us. My sister would be so happy to see Ethan growing up surrounded by love like this." Michael stepped forward, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "I believe she's smiling too," he replied, "and I promise I'll always be here for both of you." Sarah said nothing, but in her tear-bright eyes, Michael saw gratitude, trust, and perhaps a hint of something tender that words could not yet express. That late afternoon, the sky glowed in a soft golden hue, the last light of day spilling across the wide garden behind the house. Roses swayed gently in the breeze, while Ethan's cheerful laughter echoed like the perfect soundtrack for a life-changing moment. Michael stood beneath the arch of flowers, his heart pounding hard in his chest. In his hand rested a small velvet box he had been holding onto for days. His gaze lingered on Sarah, her slender figure seated on the grass, cradling Ethan in her arms, her face glowing with simple joy. He stepped forward, his voice trembling slightly. "Sarah." She looked up, surprised by the unusual gravity in his tone. Michael drew in a deep breath and dropped to one knee. "Before Ethan came, my life was filled only with work, money, and emptiness. But the day he appeared, along with you, everything changed. For the first time, I finally know what happiness feels like. This house stopped feeling cold, and my heart stopped feeling alone. Sarah, I don't want to just be a guardian for you two. I want to be part of this family. Will you marry me?" Sarah froze, her eyes instantly brimming with tears. She covered her mouth, her heart overflowing. Ethan, as if sensing the special moment, let out a burst of bright laughter and clapped his tiny hands together. "Michael?" Sarah whispered through tears. "Yes, I will." He slid the ring onto her finger, both of their eyes shining with emotion. In that moment, the garden seemed to hold its breath, bearing witness to the birth of a true family. From that day forward, the once empty mansion transformed completely. Ethan's laughter echoed through the hallways. Sarah often hummed softly while preparing meals, and Michael no longer rushed out the door each morning. He stayed longer to play with his son, to talk with Sarah, to savor the small but precious details. In the evenings, they gathered in the living room, Ethan crawling playfully on the carpet, Michael reading a book, Sarah knitting a small scarf. There was no master and servant anymore, no shadows of loneliness. Only a family. One evening, standing on the balcony overlooking the very garden where he had knelt, Michael whispered to himself, "Fame, money, they were only shells. This is what I was truly searching for." And when he turned back to see Sarah holding Ethan, both of them radiant with laughter, he knew he had found the real purpose of his life. Not numbers or wealth, but love and family. 2 years had passed since that golden afternoon in the rose garden. Time had brought many changes, but the most beautiful of all was Ethan's smile, a bright, mischievous grin from a boy now 2.5 years old, his sparkling eyes holding the light of the sky itself. Ethan learned to speak quickly, to walk quickly, but most importantly, he learned to love, nurtured by the warmth surrounding him. He called Michael Dad with innocent certainty, and Sarah remained his safe haven, the gentle embrace of a mother's love. The once cold mansion now echoed with the sound of small footsteps racing down the halls, with laughter filling every room. At the dining table, gone was the silence of a lonely businessman. In its place were daily stories, playful chatter, and the tender glances Michael and Sarah exchanged. Michael, who once lived only for contracts and numbers, now found pure joy in reading bedtime stories to Ethan or strolling with Sarah and their son in the park on weekends. Sarah, who once lived in fear and scarcity, now smiled with peace every time she looked at her husband and child. That afternoon, in the vibrant garden of roses, Ethan chased butterflies with uncontainable delight, his laughter ringing out like bells. Michael and Sarah sat together on the wooden bench beneath the trees, their hands intertwined, their eyes meeting in a silent language of happiness. In that moment, the three of them became a living portrait of family. A joyful child, a steady father, a gentle mother, all bound not by circumstance, but by love. As Michael watched Sarah and Ethan laughing together under the golden sky, he finally understood the truth he had been searching for his whole life. And the message of this story, simple yet eternal, is this: real family is built not just by blood, but by love, sacrifice, forgiveness, and trust.